Later in this video, I'm going to ask you 3 questions that may completely change the way that you think about your retirement and maybe even your life. But first, we need to talk about why retirement won't make you happier and the 2 things that you should focus on instead. For the vast majority of us, yes, retirement absolutely will make you happier at first. But will that feeling last? Sure, during those first few weeks of retirement, you're likely to feel some cocktail of joy, uncertainty, relief, and excitement, especially if you've been looking forward to it for some time. There's plenty of research out there that suggests that anticipation of an event can enhance your enjoyment of it once it finally arrives. There's absolutely something to savor and celebrate about crossing the threshold into a life of freedom and autonomy. Sadly, something called hedonic adaptation starts to kick in. Now, hedonic adaptation, if I'm even saying that right, is a psychological phenomenon that suggests that we eventually return to our steady state level of happiness after a positive or negative life event. Unfortunately, at some point, the elation of retirement will wear off. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news here. But why is everyone so obsessed with happiness anyway? After all, if we found ourselves in a 24/7 state of smiley bliss, would we even feel it anymore, much less savor it? It's almost as if happiness needs some sort of contrasting emotion before it can even exist. It's like trying to catch your own shadow. So I'm going to ask you to do something controversial. Throw away the idea of trying to be happy. This is something that I started doing a while ago, and ironically, it's made me happier. But if we're not pursuing happiness, what are we pursuing? Now, I want to caution you at this point. Beyond looking for happiness, there be monsters. If you go down the path of finding your purpose, well, you run the risk of walking into the self-help hall of mirrors where you're perpetually working on yourself. Or even worse, you end up on YouTube watching a 2-hour-long video about how Carl Jung and Nietzsche saw human existence differently. Not that I know anything about this. No, pursuing a purpose can be as much of a trap as pursuing happiness. I believe there's virtue in just living a good life. There's a real-world element here that I think we should root ourselves in. And yes, there are some people who walk out of the womb knowing their purpose in this world. And if that's you, fantastic. Go forth and pursue your purpose. None of this may apply to you. But if it's not happiness, and it's not a grand purpose, what should we focus on? If we're using Maslow's hierarchy as a framework, there are 2 useful things that I think belong at the top of that pyramid. I strongly believe that it's important to have a meaningful pursuit teed up for when you retire, or at least relatively soon after you retire. Pina coladas on the beach may be exactly what you need during those first couple of weeks of retirement. But what do I mean when I say meaningful pursuit? Well, we don't necessarily need to save the whales here. When I think of the retirees that I've helped over the years, their meaningful pursuits came in dozens of different shapes and flavors. I've seen woodworking, learning the piano, travel, starting a charity to promote fitness, volunteering at church, animal rescue, participating in high-performance driving events, working the polls during election season, helping with the grandkids, yoga, mountain biking, and of course, yes, golf and fishing. Really, to me, a meaningful pursuit can be anything that keeps you engaged, challenges you, and puts you into frequent social situations. On the other hand, the retirees that I've seen struggle once that initial hit of retirement dopamine wore off were the ones that didn't have a meaningful pursuit to pick up once they stepped away from work. I know you're totally shocked by this, but spending more time in front of the television isn't going to do the trick. Which brings us to the second thing you should focus on instead of happiness. Cognitively, we all understand that we have a finite time on this earth, and we all have things that we want to do before we check out. Of course, work and everyday life get in the way. Once you hit retirement, you now have a bigger opportunity to turn those dreams into reality. But here's the catch. A lot of people don't. And I think it's because we spend most of our lives deferring those dreams with the idea that we'll eventually get to them in retirement. and we never really get out of that mindset. But how do you prioritize what's truly important to you? How can you take advantage of your time and live a life with fewer regrets? Whenever I start working with a new client, we begin with a few exercises that are designed to help us zero in on the things that we want to get off the bucket list and into the financial plan. One of these exercises is a series of 3 questions developed by one of the pioneers of financial life planning, George Kinder, in his book, Lighting the Torch. I'm going to go over these 3 questions with you, but a word of warning first. You may find that these questions create an emotional response. If so, that's completely normal. So, if you're willing, let's get started. Question number 1. Imagine that you're financially secure. You have enough money to take care of all of your needs, both today and in the future. How would you live your life? What would you do with your money? And would you change anything? If you need to, press pause here to take a minute and think about it. Question number 2. Now imagine that your doctor tells you that you have between 5 and 10 years to live. The good news is that you won't ever feel sick or infirmed in any way. The bad news is that you'll have no notice of when you'll die. What will you do with the time that you have left? Would you change your life? And if so, how? Feel free to pause this here if you need a minute to think about this. Question number 3. Finally, imagine your doctor tells you that you only have 1 day to live. Now stop for a minute. What feelings arise as you confront your now very real mortality? What dreams would you leave unfulfilled? What would you wish you'd done or been? Take a breath. How are you feeling? I've been asking these questions for a while now, and they still move things inside me. Of course, it's personal connections. Friends, family, loved ones, they're the answer for most people after reading that 3rd question. But I don't want you to dismiss anything that comes up for you during questions 1 and 2. Go on that safari. Take that trip to Tuscany. Experience life if you can. We only get one. And while you may not be able to afford to buy a Ferrari, you could absolutely rent one and flog it a little bit too. So write down all the things that came up for you through those 3 questions and start putting them on the calendar. I'm not opposed to the idea of a bucket list, but only if you're actively working towards crossing the next item off the list. Book a flight, make a plan. Fighting inertia is the key here. And to me, that's part of the genius of Kinder's questions. I think the emotional element of answering them helps us get off our behinds and start moving. But if nothing exotic comes up for you during this exercise, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with you, and you're not alone. Just keep doing those meaningful pursuits that you're already doing. Who knows? Between focusing on meaningful pursuits and actively crossing those items off your bucket list, you may find that you're happier. And now that you have some clarity and urgency around the retirement and the life that you want, you might want to get started on that life ASAP. But how do you know when the time is right? Well, if you answer yes to the 6 questions in this video, maybe you should retire right now. I'll see you there.